All right, we're moving on to the Pac-12. We're talking Pac-12 now. Preseason view for the 2022 season. Same as always, we're going alphabetical order here. So we'll start with Arizona. Mike, first impressions, Arizona.
Uh,
What are we feeling?
Arizona is a basketball school in the U.S. contiguous state of Arizona.
It's going to be a lot of
Um,
upset people.
Jed,
Not really.
Jed Fish is the head coach, and
That
they're a
he is.
football team. Yeah, they have a bell tower that they put the bell from the USS Arizona in. Otherwise, though, all of those facts are more relevant than what they will do on the football field this year. That's not an indictment on Jed Fish. Jed Fish is working his magic. He's trying to pick up players in the portal,
He's
but they're
trying.
not. They're not very good. They're not going to be a bowl team. Uh, let's see, 4-8 is like maybe the ceiling, maybe 5. They might
I was going to
get
say
to
5
5 or
wins is
7.
possible. 5 wins
Yeah,
possible for
I
Arizona.
think 5 is the ceiling. I think 3 is the floor. They're not going to be very good.
So Arizona does have a QB1 in Jaden DeLora and wide receiver 1, Jacob Crowing, who they both got, I believe, from transfer portal. I could be totally
Yes, no, they did.
but
Delora came from Washington State and Cowing from UTEP.
yeah, but other than that, I think it's going to be leaps and it's going to be a couple years before Arizona really starts to be bowl eligible again. At least for Fish's first year, I don't see them having the juice to pull the squeeze on 6 wins. Um, I think
Yeah,
it'll be another year or so before they get in a bowl game.
yeah, yeah. I think very much like the first year for Jed Fish. Year 2, not going to be good. Yeah, that's about it.
Arizona State. They have the 6th most incoming transfers in the college football world, at least for Power 5. And it's not going to matter because they lost so much more talent than they gained from those transfers, honestly. I don't know if you disagree, but they're thin on the receiver core. Herm Edwards' team, they've reached a bowl game. They've reached a bowl game in every season except 2020 during the COVID season. But I don't see them scratching out 6 wins. I don't know if you disagree or not. I don't see it in an Arizona State team that's going to be meh at best.
My dog is articulating my feelings about Arizona State. I think they're not going to be very good. I think there's too much noise and turmoil going on around Herm's program. I think the transfers are an indication of that. They lose Jaden Daniels to LSU, but they gain Emory Jones from Florida. Anybody who watched enough Florida games last year, me being one of those people, Emory Jones isn't good. I
Nope.
don't. Yeah, he's not good, and that's
You
why
get
I
a transfer
think.
from Florida if you're good.
Well, yeah, that
For
and
Arizona State, at least.
Anthony Richardson very clearly demonstrated that he had a way higher ceiling than Emory Jones did at Florida. Billy Napier comes in there and says Richardson's our guy. Emory Jones leaves. Everybody expected that, but I don't see how going to a worse situation in Arizona State in a conference that is in the Big 12 South, in a conference that, or sorry, not the Big 12, in the Pac-12 South. They have to get by teams like USC, UCLA, and Utah within their division. Never mind the rest of the conference. I'm not hopeful for Herm. I think this season, this team, the amount of talent they've lost combined with the sanctions that everybody expects to come, I would be surprised if Herm makes it through the next 2 years as the coach there. And I think this season is going to be the beginning of the end. I think similar to Arizona, I think 5 wins is the ceiling. They are projected to have.
I think they're projected to have 5.5 wins.
Their total. I see it at 6. So Vegas is very much down on them. I'm down on them. I think I would lean under. I'm not going to take it. But yeah, I'm not hopeful for the Sun Devils at all.
Yeah, I lean under as well. I think there's just too much turmoil in the program to really make a difference, inside and out. On the field and off kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, moving on to Cal. Cal under Justin Wilcox, weaker strength of schedule. I think they have 6 projected wins or something like that, according to PFF. But I have them as a very average college football team in and outside of the Pac-12 that probably is going to make a bowl game, given their defensive capability and weak strength. I don't know if you disagree with me or not. I just don't see them being superstars. I don't see them failing either.
Nope, 6-6. I think they're the epitome of. They might be the epitome of 6-6 across college football.
Yeah, and because there's games where they open up against UC Davis and UNLV where you're like, Cal should win those games, and then they go to Notre Dame, and then they go to USC, and they play UCLA at the end of the year. So there are teams that they're definitely going to lose to, and there's teams that are definitely going to win to. I think if this shakes out, you see them exactly at 6-6 in a bowl game of little consequence.
Yeah.
Sticking with C's,
Middle of the road,
Colorado.
Cal
Oh,
will be
you
good.
want to?
No, I was
Yeah,
going to say middle of the road. They'll be better on defense than on offense.
yeah,
Perfectly average.
perfectly average.
Yeah,
Colorado has a football team.
they do. Despite the reports that they don't, they do. But they're not very good.
No, they are
And
not.
they're not going to be very good. They're going to be competing for the bottom with Arizona next.
Yeah, I think Colorado probably has less than 3 wins, but that's just me. Oregon, actual potential. I want to hear your thoughts first.
Okay. I am high on Oregon. I am high on Dan Lanning being a Kirby Smart and thereby Nick Saban disciple. I am high on Bo Nix's potential in the Pac-12. I believe they are in the North, so they avoid having to play USC and Utah. They get
Mm-hmm.
Utah at home. They don't play USC. And right now their team total is 8.5. They play Georgia week 1. The rest of their schedule, they've got 4
I'm
games
looking
that
at it
you look
right
at
now.
their.
Yeah.
You got 4 games on their schedule that you would expect them to possibly lose. They are at home against BYU, at
Yep.
home against UCLA, at
Yep.
home against Utah,
Yep.
and at Oregon State.
Correct.
So if you're looking at over 8.5, they got to get to 9. Out of those 4 games, they only have to win 2. And for a team this good, with this much talent, with a guy who has a ton of experience in the SEC, and a coach who is going to have that defense playing with a little bit more aggression than they played with last year, which was the big knock on them. I mean, when they went to Utah, they got just run over, and then they did it
Yeah, they
again
got
in the
smacked.
yeah, they did it again in the Pac-12 championship game. So they get Utah at home, where I'm sure they'll be out for blood and looking for payback. Um, I love this over. I love Oregon's potential here. I think they're going to come out of the Pac-12 North easily. They'll be playing for the Pac-12 championship. And I think Dan Lanning gets off on the right foot. They've got recruits coming in behind him, behind Bo Nix. I think the Oregon train keeps rolling.
Yeah, I think so. My biggest point was that I think Bo Nix is actually a pretty good college quarterback. Probably a decent backup in the NFL if it comes to that. But I don't understand. There was a lot of Bo Nix hate in Auburn. There was a lot of, we'll get to that, offseason shenanigans with Auburn. A lot of rumors about a potential firing and all that. I just don't think, I think the SEC is really, really tough for any kind of college quarterback. And I think with Bo Nix not succeeding at Auburn, I think the problem was more not so much coaching, but it's just so difficult. I think with his move to the Pac-12, some of the defenses, aside from Week 1 at Georgia, that's just a brutal misfortune. But I see him stepping up and performing well in Oregon, and it wouldn't shock me if Oregon has upwards of 8 to 9 wins and is heading to the Pac-12 championship. I almost kind of expect it, even though Dan Lanigan is a first-year coach. He has the experience, and that's why Oregon went after him. So aside from that first tough week, I think Oregon hammers out its way to a bowl game and a possible Pac-12 berth. I don't
Yeah,
think either.
I think the two things. One, I think the Bo Nix's dad is a big time Auburn grad, which
Yeah,
put a lot of pressure on him from the moment he came in. I
a
think he was a
lot.
4-star recruit, and he started that Oregon game and somehow went out and threw a hail mary and beat them. And ever since, there's
Yeah, I
been the
remember that
yeah
that that game because I had Oregon money line and they were winning up
yes
until the last fucking play of the game. So
yep
that was great.
yeah. So Oregon, yeah, he set expectations for himself there, never quite lived up to them, and I think he goes to Georgia, he should win the job, and then or sorry, he goes to Oregon, and then the first week they're going to play Georgia and they're going to lose, which is fine, but I think it does have the unintended benefit of they're going to show up week one, they play Georgia, they lose to Georgia, then they go back to the West Coast where nobody will pay attention to them, nobody from Bo Nix's circle is going to be hounding him about why can't he get it done at Oregon, and they'll be able to get rolling without any sort of eyes on them at all. And I think that helps them in the sense of we're going to turn around after that. You know, when they after they play Georgia, and you're going to get to probably at home against UCLA on October 22nd, and they're going to be 5-1.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
and you won't have recognized it or
yeah,
realized it.
and you won't have thought about Oregon for the past month and a half, but all of a sudden they're 5-1 playing UCLA at home, a game they should win. And then you look at the rest of their schedule; it's at California, at Colorado, who we said Colorado's bad and California's meh. Washington at home in a game they'll get up for, and then they
Yep.
play Utah. So all of a sudden now they're 9-1 going into that game against Utah. You would like to think if you're Dan Lanning and you've really got the train rolling in the right direction. If Bo Nix is playing well and your last two games, Utah, Oregon State, are the two marquee games at the end of your schedule.
If you're
And
Oregon, you can get excited.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So I think the schedule sets up well. I think there's an unintended benefit of playing Georgia neutral site first game is that you kind of take the pressure off immediately to perform. They're going to be expected to be competitive in that game, but they're not going to be expected to win it. And if they don't win it, nobody will be paying attention to what they do for the next 4 weeks. So
Yeah.
um, I really like the way this sets up for Oregon. The total is on my card. Take the over. Believe in Oregon this year. Believe in the Ducks. They're going to be good.
Well, keeping with the Oregon theme, Oregon State, um, not a bad team. I want to hear your thoughts before I put some of my own out there because I don't think I'm coming in with anything radical, but I want to hear what you have to say about kind of their strength of schedule and what they're looking at.
Yeah, no, I think upper half of the meh in the middle of the Pac-12, and we talked about this a little bit with the Big 12, but there are there are probably 6 teams in that meh category for the Pac-12. Like, Arizona State, uh, Cal, Oregon State. You maybe throw Stanford in there and Washington State. Those teams are all going to hover between 5 and 7 or 8 wins, somewhere in there. I think Oregon State's going to be in the upper half of those. I don't think last year was necessarily a fluke, but they get a great offensive line back this year. Chance Nolan's a pretty good quarterback. I like their ability to replicate their success. Their strength of schedule helps them, and that it's a pretty easy schedule. They get a lot of teams at home. Um, so I think that they're a bowl team. I would say they should be safe in that they're a bowl team, and then anything on top of that is gravy. If they go 7-5 or 8-4, I think that's phenomenal for the Beavers.
I don't know that I see the Beavers getting 8 wins. I certainly see 6 or 7. Um, it, they have a gauntlet right at the end of the year. It's playing Cal, then at Arizona State, which is kind of a gauntlet, and then they're playing Oregon, who we just discussed is a great team, and then they got Utah in the beginning of October. But a lot of the teams they play, they start off at Boise State, which is at best a coin cost, or they should be favored. Then they're at Fresno State, Montana State in the third week, which they should easily roll. So I think there's a lot of possibility that Oregon shows up kind of in that 3-0 mark before playing USC and Utah late September, early October. Um, I Chance Nolan. almost seems like a little bit of an underrated quarterback. Um, I think the weaker schedule. I don't think it puts them in Pac-12 championship running or
No.
appearance running, but I think it certainly puts them in like the floor. We talk about the floor and the ceiling a lot, which I like. I think that the floor is not making a bowl game. The ceiling is making a bowl game at like 8 wins, and I think you're
Mhm.
more going to find yourself in the middle of the pack there, where you have a bowl game appearance at about 6 or 7. But I still think that's a pretty good season for Oregon State, who doesn't have the best Pac-12 recruiting class. It doesn't have you know a great defensive line. They haven't gotten a lot of players in the portal, so I think middle of the pack is a fair expectation. I would be disappointed if I'm an Oregon State fan if they don't make a bowl game.
Yeah. They I think the biggest message they could send to their team is if you're looking at their um, if you're looking at their division, if Coach Smith is looking at their division and he says it's Oregon and a whole lot, like we said, a whole lot of men,
Yep.
and what I'm telling my team is why not us, guys? Why not us?
Yeah.
They might out of the rest of this group, most years you would say Washington should be the next best team in the Pac-12 North, but Washington has lost so much, and we'll get to them, but they've lost so much talent,
A
especially
lot of
defensively.
unknowns. A lot of
Yeah,
unknowns.
yeah. That I if I'm coaching Oregon State, I'm saying we are the second best team definitively in the Pac-12 North. We'll have a shot to beat Oregon at home. Let's go out. Let's go take what's ours. And so I think you could realistically see eight wins out of Oregon State. I think they're, like I said, in the upper half of that meh sort of band with a lot of talent coming back. Don't be surprised if Oregon State finishes second in the Pac-12.
Yeah. Well, speaking of below, man, Stanford's a football team.
Yeah,
Uh,
you
they're
you
gonna
go you go because
Ooh, they're below average this year. A lot of liabilities on defense. They're not going to make a bowl game, at least not in my mind. Pretty strong
no.
strength of schedule too. I mean, they started at Colgate, have fun playing at Colgate or playing at home against Colgate, whatever. But then they're they are at home against USC, which is certainly a difficult game. Then get this, and this is my favorite part of their season. This is part of why I'm so down on them. Then they have a bye, September 17th. And then they play 10 weeks of football without a break. They are off that 17th week of September, and they go through the regular season on November 26th playing teams that are far better than them. I don't see, looking at this schedule right now, I don't see 3 wins on this for Stanford. And Tanner McKee is a good quarterback, sure, maybe. Who knows? Um, he might sneaky be like in next year's NFL draft. But barring like a Joe Burrow esque run, there's no way these guys are making a bowl game. They just don't have the defense. They just don't have the offense.
Yeah, I you make a great point about their schedule. I didn't even notice that when going through.
I mean that. I
Um,
mean, you get an injury week 4, and that guy like he's not coming
yeah,
back. He's not
yeah,
playing at Notre Dame 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later,
yeah,
right?
and I mean
Don't have
the brutal part for them is that they're almost out of contention before they get to the part of their schedule that they would have a chance in. So
correct.
they go 1-1 to start, then they're off, and then it's at Washington, at Oregon. They get Oregon State at home, who we just said is not going to be an easy game for them. Then
No,
they
I think
go,
they crush. Oh, I think Oregon State crushes them.
yeah, and then they go to Notre Dame, Arizona State at home, and then to UCLA. So those first 6 games, you've got one team you might have a chance against, and that's Arizona State on October
Yeah,
22nd at home. So by the
and that
time
and if we're looking at Arizona State on paper right now, we haven't seen the first 10 games of the season, 8 games of the season, whatever it would be.
yeah,
But Stanford's a worse team than Arizona State. We're saying that would be the closest that there is on the
yeah,
spread.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Could be
If
a game.
you're, yeah, Tanner McGee's got a higher ceiling, but Emory Jones has a lower floor. If we're just talking about quarterback, or not a lower floor, sorry, a higher floor. So if we're just talking about quarterbacks, so that's not, yeah, like you said, that's not a guaranteed game either. So if the results pan out the way that we just talked about, they go to Halloween weekend 2-6, and the rest of their
Not
schedule is still not kind. Washington State will get to. They get them at home, but then they're at Utah, at Cal, and then they get BYU, who's better than them too. So they 3 wins is a you got to really squint to find three. I don't see four, and their total is 4.5. I think this is a bad year for David Shaw. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they move on from Shaw. He seems like a Stanford guy. He's obviously been there so long, but and maybe the administration just doesn't care about whether or not they are good at football anymore.
yeah.
But if they do, I think there's a chance they just try to liven up Stanford football, and this is Shaw's last year, and it probably isn't his fault. I mean, you could they're recruiting well, but it probably isn't his fault. I think it's just a brutal schedule coming out of that bye week. You're right, and I may add the Stanford under to my card. We'll put that in the tickler file with Iowa and see if we want to add one.
I think I talked myself into it. I just simply don't see 4.5 wins.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels very Georgia Tech when we're looking at Georgia Tech and going where are those four
Right,
wins coming from?
right.
It feels very similar.
It's not there. So moving on, UCLA. All right, minor difficulties, but we're talking UCLA now. Um, so we'll get to Chip Kelly as a betting facet of ours later on, probably during the regular season. But he is a good coach. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on UCLA specifically. I think they're a pretty good team. I don't think they're the best team in the Pac-12 by any means, but I think Chip has kind of set up a good team. Got a couple people going, um, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, UCLA is the Oklahoma State of the Pac-12. They're comfortably the fourth best team above the rest of the teams that are in that meh bracket. They're also comfortably the fourth best team behind Oregon, Utah, and USC. So
Yes,
they band very nicely into we are the fourth best team. It doesn't matter what we do, barring some sort of injury to DTR or Zach Charbonnet. They're going to be the fourth best team in the Pac-12. Their schedule is fairly kind as far as how it splits up the big boys in the Pac-12, but they do get all of them, which is a thing that Oregon doesn't have to deal with. So they get Utah at home, then a bye week, then at Oregon, but then they don't play USC till the second to last week of the season. So overall, I expect 8 wins. Like you know, like Oklahoma State, fourth best in their conference, and the last thing I'll say is I do wish they were playing a better non-conference slate. Bowling because I think
agreed.
they, yeah,
Agreed on that.
I think that they would be a really interesting team to watch against some teams from the SEC or the ACC, all the other Power Five conferences, basically. But they're playing two FCS schools from Alabama and Bowling Green. So thanks, Chip, for setting up nothing for
Yeah,
us to watch. You
I mean,
son of a bitch.
I I don't know what he was looking for from those games, but so everyone's aware, September 3rd they're playing Bowling Green. That's the opening game of the season. Then they go to play Alabama State and South Alabama at home. None of which are going to be a challenge for UCLA unless they really mess things up. Then they go to Colorado to play Colorado, who we have already mentioned is a terrible football team, and then they go play Washington and Utah at home. I think those would be the first two challenges of the season. Maybe not so much on Washington, Utah. I don't. I will. We will get to it, but I think they're the best team in the Pac-12. But uh, the first month of the season for UCLA is going to be, saying a cakewalk would be putting it gently. They
Mm-hmm.
should dominate these teams. So I'm looking to see what the spreads are kind of down the road on those. But I don't think UCLA is going to challenge themselves enough until the later half of the season to really like. And maybe they'll be ranked, but I don't even know that they'll be worthy of being ranked up until the point where they start playing some good teams. And it's just kind of unfortunate that they're playing who they're playing because DTR is pretty damn good at quarterback and Zach Charbonnet. I'm gonna butcher that name, but he's a running back. He's not a bad running back either. He's actually probably one of the best running backs in college football. Um, so I mean, those two combined, you have a lot of options. I just don't know that they have the passing game to kind of support it, even though they have a great quarterback. I just think they lack the receivers and more so maybe like the offensive scheme to help support it. But I think Bruins are probably number 4 in the Pac-12. Maybe a like high 20s ranking if they really start outperforming later in the season. But I don't see him making the Pac-12 championship. I think a good bowl game might be possible, but a bowl game is probably the floor and ceiling. And depending on what you think, you know, I don't see a New Year's game. I see like a very close second of probably one of those later bowl games. But
Yeah,
I don't see them in contention at the end of the year for the Pac-12 championship.
absolutely not. The one thing they could underperform if Charbonnet gets injured, just because they do start with 6 games in a row, and if Charbonnet gets hurt in those games, given his ceiling as a prospect going
Yeah,
into a draft year, there's a chance he Derek Stingley's it,
yeah, he
and
gets cuts
then
out
yeah, and then you're looking at a very different offense without Charbonnet. DTR will play the whole year
very much
because
so.
yeah, he's fighting to possibly have a career in the NFL, but especially in this quarterback class. But if Charbonnet gets hurt and opts out, or some sort of combination of those two, um, down the stretch, really that kind of takes them out of contention. And granted, 4 of their last 5 games are besides Colorado, probably the worst teams in the some of the worst teams in the Pac-12 with Stanford, Arizona State, and Arizona,
Yep.
and then USC and at Cal. So they should be able to manage everybody besides USC, although that at Cal game might get sneaky. So that's why I say if they lose Charbonnet for some reason, there is a possibility that they come in under the total. I'm not touching the total. The total I think
Neither
is
am I. Neither am I.
7.5. I think they sit perfectly on 8 wins.
I don't disagree. Um, any other thoughts on UCLA? I think we've covered him
Yeah.
decently. Um, moving on to another college in the state of California,
I
USC.
was I was wondering where that was going to end up. Moving on to another college.
All right, so I'm gonna give some names to you, and I want you to tell me what they all have in common. Okay, Judas, Benedict Arnold, Marcus Brutus, Lincoln Riley. What do you think? What do you think? I mean, what could possibly be in common with those people? I'm sorry, I'm going to go on a
did,
tangent here. I don't give a
did,
shit that Lincoln Riley left
no, I
OU.
don't. I don't either.
I first of all, the moaning and complaining. Like, first of all, you poach coaches all the time in every conference. It's the same thing over and over again. And of course, he left and he took everybody with him. So I just thought it was funny that was like that. I mean, that was the offseason discussion early in the offseason before USC is jumping ship from the Pac-12.
Yeah.
But I was laughing at some of the shit that people were saying, and of course, OU fans, God love them, did not take it well.
Mm-mm.
So that was pretty funny. Uh, but what I am going to say as far as USC is, I think people are pretty high on them, and I don't disagree that they're going to be a good football team, but they also I'm not seeing some of the things that people are saying are going to come to fruition. I it's like I mean, for the fans out there, we use Pro Football Focus. It's a great tool to help us kind of evaluate all these teams. Um, The top biggest strength that they listed for USC was Lincoln Riley's Aurora, which I don't know. I mean, look, they got a great quarterback. They got some pretty good in Caleb Williams, right? Who is following Lincoln Riley's transition to the Trojans. But I don't know that with their schedule and kind of uh, a lot of controversy, not just around the team, but around USC in general, kind of jumping ship. I think it's a lot to put on a team's back. So unless the ceiling is as high as Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams make it, but I think this is like the season's boom or bust, right? Like they're either going to boom to the point where they are in the Pac-12 championship and they are maybe even in um, you know, one of those situations where if they look back, they're like, oh, if we just beat Notre Dame the last game of the season, like we could have been in playoff contention. But I don't know that I see that. I see more of a bust. Um, I their first real challenge is going to be like Oregon State because they start out at home against Rice, then at Stanford, then home against Fresno State. Right, their schedule is pretty weak. Um, but I see them as a bowl game and not anything else in my mind, to be honest with you.
I
I
I
know you
am
disagree, so I
I
want to hear
am
why.
I am buying the USC hype, and I didn't think I would because
Okay.
that's the public the public hype machine
Yeah, everybody and
is
their mother likes USC and Texas this year. I'm just
yes.
not seeing it on the other side.
I don't buy it with Texas. I buy it with USC. I think that the biggest difference between those two teams is that USC has a better coach. They have a better quarterback, a proven quarterback. They bring in similar talent at the skill positions, but the offensive line is going to be way better than Texas's is. And
That's fair.
you mesh that with a schedule that when you stare at it long enough, you start to convince yourself that they don't lose a game this year. And
Notre Dame? Notre
uh,
Dame, last game of the season. Maybe
at
Notre Dame.
home,
We're not talking independence on this episode, but
at
Notre Dame
home,
at
at home
UCLA,
with another. They're at home playing another first year coach
at
with.
Utah.
So here's I'm getting there. If you their team total's 9.5.
I just thought of that tweet. Go ahead.
Oh God, I think I read your mind when you said it. Right before you said it. Their team total is 9.5. I am not putting it on the card because I do think I think the team total. I will say this. I think the team totals for Utah, USC, and Oregon all go over. The one I'm adding to the card is Oregon because I think the path there is the easiest. But when you look at USC's schedule, they don't play a competitive game on paper till they go to Utah.
Yep.
And I think that is the game that will determine the Pac-12 South. There's no debating that. I think Utah wins it.
Okay.
I do because going to Utah, you know that game's going to be at night. You know it's going to be nationally televised. It's going to be a war. I think it's a tough ask for even as good as Caleb Williams is, and he is that good. He was Trevor Lawrence type good his freshman year at Oklahoma with a supporting cast that I think was somewhat questionable by Oklahoma standards. I think he's got 5 tomato cans or 6 tomato cans to get meshed up with Jordan Addison, and they have other skill players. They have some monsters on the defense. They are. I think they go into that game. I think they lose that game because it's tough to go to Utah, night, elevation, everything we're talking about. But I think
Yep.
they do. I think they do roll through the rest of the schedule at 11-1. I think 10. If you look at the rest of their schedule, at UCLA and Notre Dame, the last 2 weeks of the year are the only other losable games really that they should lose on that schedule, barring a major upset. And that puts them unless Utah goes pretty much perfect the rest of their way, which I don't know if that's going to happen. USC makes the Pac-12 championship game. I think by then the whole team's on the same page. I think they're more explosive than Oregon. and I think they win. I think ultimately they win the Pac-12. And if I'm looking across the rest of the Power Five conferences at who else is going to make the playoff, because you assume the SEC is going to get Alabama and Georgia in, I think USC has the best shot of USC of the presumptive champions. USC, Oklahoma,
Mm.
and Clemson to get to the playoff, and it's less about believing in the team as a whole because they're not national title contenders. Don't get me wrong. The USC, whichever one of those three teams is the fourth team into the playoff, is going to get boat raced. But because they're
As God wishes,
yeah,
inshallah. That's what happens every year.
because they're going to play Alabama and they're going to get run over. But this is the beginning of Lincoln Riley's ascendancy, and I don't know if he did this looking at the schedule and knowing what USC could put together this year, but I see how they get to the playoff on paper. I'm not going to put them on the card because I think the variance is big. I'll give you credit there. I think that they have the potential to lose 4 games and go 8-4. And I think USC fans, when they finally realize that, when they check their phones on the beach in February and they realize they went 8-4, they're not going to be very happy. But it's also year one, so I think if you're saying 8-4 is the floor, that means they lose at Utah, at UCLA, and Notre Dame, and another game along the way. Is 8-4 really that big a disappointment when you just showed up and you haven't had a chance to actually recruit at USC yet?
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
fair.
I don't think so, and I think they're going to be better than that. I think 10-2. I would lean the over. I think they go 10-2 and that would be kind of disappointing. I think 11-1 is certainly possible, and I think they'd be probably the team in the playoff at that point.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. So to transition then to Utah, because you my friend, are big on Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams at USC. I, on the other hand, am big on Utah. I think I'm going to start here, so I hope I'm not interjecting. But I think Utah is probably the best team in the Pac-12. I think Utah has a more than outside shot at starting off really strong if they can beat Florida at Florida. And I think if they can do that, then they set themselves up for immediate like talk about playoff contention, not just Pac-12 but college football playoffs. I think a ceiling is a New Year's Bowl. I think, or I'm sorry, I think the ceiling is the playoffs. I think the floor is the a New Year's Six Bowl. I think anything less for Utah is a disservice because I'm looking at this team, and I know a lot of people don't agree, but I'm looking at this team. Cam Rising is a had a breakout year last year. He's a fantastic quarterback who is returning, and it's well within the realm of possibility that he does it again. And if they can kind of keep going down the path they were going, I know they're struggling having some wide receivers with not having who they want, but I think otherwise strong possibility they come out on top.
I I don't doubt. I don't doubt Utah's ability to compete in the Pac-12 South. I think that they could be as high. So you look right. They have eight games they're supposed to win, and their team total's 9. So the rest of those games are at Florida, at UCLA, at home against Oregon, or USC, and at Oregon. So 3 of those 4 games are on the road. However, only 3 of those games are in conference. So if if you believe like I do that they beat USC at home, which that is the game they're going to they already have it circled on the calendar. They probably have like USC's logo right in between their big U in their football facility. Like they are going to sell out to win that game, right?
Agreed.
If you believe that and they win it, it's going to be very tough for them to then lose the South to USC because they would then need to lose at UCLA and at Oregon, which I think are certainly possible, and I think that might be how it shakes out. or Utah finds a way to lose another game on their schedule, which would then throw a wrench into the whole thing. Um, a game like an at Washington State is one that could definitely.
Be a letdown. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. They do have a bye in between, so it's not necessarily a letdown spot. That's the game they play after the bye after USC. But they do get at UCLA before USC, so that's the week
Yeah.
before. So that's a brutal
Um,
back to back,
yeah, that
and
is tough 2 games.
I could see a look ahead where they lose at UCLA, they go get USC, and then they lose at Oregon late in the year, and USC backdoors their way into the Pac-12 championship. So that being said, I still lean over. I think they're. I agree with you. I think Cam Rising's a fantastic quarterback. I think they play with a nastiness. It's always tough to go to Utah. They're a very good team. I think they handle Florida relatively easily. Although we'll get to Florida, and I'm not
Yeah,
as
it's
high
easy.
on. Yeah, I think Florida's set for a tough year, but I think, and that's partly because they start with Utah, which is they're a team that's got a veteran quarterback going into the swamp. Um, they're I think they win at Florida, and that sets up the rest of their schedule. I would be surprised if they go not less than 9-3. I think 9-3 is their floor for a team that's this veteran led that returns as much momentum as they had going last year, and they showed in the Rose Bowl they are not far off of a team like a Ohio State. They are not a. They are a legit top 10 team, and they bring back most of the players that are the reason why. So I think 10-2 is. They could, like I said, I think there's a chance they finish 10-2. Those two losses are at Oregon and at UCLA, and they miss the Pac-12 championship at 10-2, which would be disappointing for Utah, considering you go 10-2, you expect to make your
Yeah, you
conference
expect
championship
to
game.
you expect to make a conference championship game, but not only that, but to probably nixes any hope you had at you know with this, you know, I feel like Alabama, Georgia, when they go undefeated and then they play each other, they still have the chance to make the college football
Yeah,
playoff.
yeah.
When you're
If
talking
it,
about a Pac-12 championship loss, that is a disqualifier unless you have
yes,
gone undefeated and
yeah,
maybe there was a bad call or
yeah,
controversy associated with the game. So
yeah,
I think Utah has to, if my prediction of ceiling comes true, which is they are in the number 4 slot in the college football playoffs, which I think they can contend for. They have to win the Pac-12 championship. I see that happening. I see them repeating,
yeah.
but we'll
I
see.
also listen to this. I could see a world where Utah goes 11-2, loses they go 11-1 in the regular season, then they lose the Pac-12 championship game to Oregon. Uh, Oregon goes 11-2, winning the Pac-12 championship game, or they go 10-3. Let's say they win the Pac-12
Yeah,
championship game over Utah, and USC is the team that does get the shot at the playoff at 11-1, even though they didn't win.
didn't crush them.
A la Ohio State, where they only have
Yeah,
one loss. That loss could be USC in week 6. If or sorry, USC could lose to Utah in what is that, week 7? Yeah, I think it's week 7.
yeah.
So the committee could look at USC and say they lost it week 7, a true road game at night against Utah, who ended up in the Pac-12 championship game, and they may end up putting them in because of the way they play down the stretch. That could be a possibility. Uh, I did the Pac-12 preview this morning for me, and I didn't. I was low on the Pac-12. This is going to be a really, really, really fun year at the top of the Pac-12 with what
I
goes on
agree.
between Oregon, Utah, USC, and whether or not UCLA can throw enough of a wrench into one of those three's schedule to make a difference. I'm really excited for what happens in the Pac-12 this year.
I am too. So to shore up, I know we've spent a lot of time on
Yeah,
Utah. My pick, I have 2 picks, but both of them are going to be the same relative. I have team total over 9, Utah -150, and then I have Utah to win the Pac-12 championship at +250. So I am on Utah for the Pac-12. I'm rooting for Utah in the Pac-12 for this year. Um, UCLA, Oregon, I think are all the top 3, top 4 as we kind of approach through the season along with USC. So we'll see. Wrapping it up, we have 2 Washington teams, Washington
yeah,
and Washington State. Um, take your pick on who you want to go first. You want to go Washington first? Just keep it in order.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have to talk about both. You can, if you want to talk Washington, I'll talk Washington State because I'll start with Washington State. We'll come back. We'll actually go out of order.
Okay.
Um,
Talk
I believe
Washington State. I'll follow up with anything I think needs added, but I think you're going to cover it.
I believe in Washington State this year, and that's mostly because I believe in Cam Ward. Um,
Okay.
I I'm not putting them on the card, but their team total is 5.5. And when I look down the rest of their down the rest of their schedule, I think they have the potential to be about as good as Oregon State, which is a 6-7 win team. So I think 5.5 is a little low for a team that has a quarterback like Cam Ward coming in. And the way I put it in my notes is basically this is just me hitting the I believe in Cam Ward button. Like if you believe in Cam Ward, Washington State should be better than 5 wins. If you don't, then they won't. But in the North, where, like we said, it's Oregon and it's a bunch of meh. This is one of those. I have Washington State and Oregon State as the two teams that I look at preseason, where I go, they could legitimately be talking to themselves and saying, why not us? And Washington State gets a fresh start this year after the Nick Rolovich disaster last year and all the turnover that happened. But they got ahead of it because all that turnover happened at the end of last season. They come
Yeah.
in with a fresh start. They're going back to the Cougar 8 offense. Uh, Out there in Pullman, they're not. They're going to sneak up on basically everybody. The disadvantage is they go to Wisconsin, which is a tough game week 2.
Second
They
week of the
get
season. Yep.
yeah, but they get Idaho and Colorado State at home at a conference. Their first Pac-12 game is against Oregon, which is gonna I think bring down their expectations a little bit. Which I think similar to the way Oregon plays Georgia at the beginning of the year, and it kind of tampers their expectations for the rest of the season. I think it'll be good for Washington State, and it's tough because 2 weeks later they go to USC and they have at Oregon State. So this prediction that I have with the schedule becomes tough if they really struggle out of the gate in Pac-12 play. But if they can go 2-2 against Oregon, Cal, USC, and Oregon State, they get Utah coming off the bye. But then after that, they have a chance to run the table, beat Washington home, and really finish the season strong and come out with like 6 or 7 wins. I really believe in this team. I think they'll be resilient. I think they have a lot of upside. Thoughts?
I'm not a believer, but I'm not a believer as well. If that makes sense in Cam Ward. Look, I think when you transfer from the FCS, clearly you're a good player and you're now at that top D1 level that you're playing at. There's just so many unknowns with Washington State. It all lies in Ward's hands, first of all, right? They have a couple good defensive backs in Washington State, if you didn't know, but uh, they don't have a run game. They have average at best wide receivers. They have an interior defensive line that is meh at best. I could see 6 wins. I could also not see 6 wins, and there's just so many unknowns for me. For and we'll get to Washington, but for also Washington. But I don't know that I see Washington State. I think the ceiling is a bowl game at 6 wins.
The only other point I'll add is if you're talking about a team that's on the cusp of being mediocre, pick the team that has a gimmick, and they're an air raid offense with a good quarterback. If they're going to be in shootouts, and I think that is an advantage for them. They get a full year off season to really reset there in Pullman. I like the Cougs, and conversely, as we transition into Washington,
Yeah,
not a believe. Not a believer in Washington, and really,
I'm not either.
it's two things. I don't believe Michael Penix is a good quarterback, and I don't know. This is like the Tom Allen Michael Penix divorce at Indiana. Like it's a chicken or the egg. Which one made the team stink? But
Right.
until I see it, I have to believe it was both of them. And then it's that the Jimmy Lake experiment blew up like the Hindenburg last year, and they fired him so fast it made your head spin. Kalen DeBoer, I don't believe is a bad coach, but he inherits a team that has just lost so much talent, not through the transfer, but just if you look at their secondary from last year, they had multiple first round picks in their back end, and they got demolished
Yep.
demolished by by a handful of teams. So when you look at how bad they played with that kind of talent, and yeah, you could say it's Jimmy Lake's fault. Kalen DeBoer's a better coach, and blah blah blah. But I don't believe in Washington's ability to be competitive this year. I would not be surprised if they didn't make a bowl game. I think they're bottom half of the Pac-12 North. I think it's going to be a rough year for Washington. I think the administration there is going to be shocked with the state of their football program.
I think it's interesting. I do think this is going to be a wild maybe call or guess here, but I'm looking at the schedule for both these teams, and I am seeing basically 5 wins each until the last game of the season when they play each other.
Yeah, yeah,
I think here's what's fun about college football. We very well may see a November 26th game between Washington State and Washington, where what is on the line is a bowl game.
yeah,
I am with you that I think Washington State is better than Washington. I Again, I don't think head coach Kalen Duber is necessarily a bad coach, but there's just so much unknown, right? Like Washington reliably is going to start off 3-1. They're going to beat Kent State. They're going to beat Portland State. They're going to lose to Michigan State, and then they're probably going to beat Stanford. If they lose to Stanford, it's over, right? Because that's probably the first game where like Stanford maybe comes in and plays spoiler. But then they're at UCLA. That's a wash. And then they have a couple tough games before they're off late October, and I just don't see Washington pulling out 6 wins unless the sixth win is basically the last 2 games of the season when they play at Colorado at home and then they go to Washington State. If they can, what we presume right now to be upset Washington State, you may see them in a bowl game, but I don't think Washington's good. I think there's still a lot of unknowns about Washington State. We could both be very well like totally wrong on these two teams, and they both are just trash. But
yeah.
I do see Washington State as the better Washington team in the state of Washington. But neither are going to win the Pac-12.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that Washington has going for it that Washington State doesn't is they don't get USC or Utah, and that's big. That's big for
Yeah,
Washington. They only have to play Oregon in those top three teams. They get UCLA, but that's not the same as having to play USC and Utah out of the
it
South.
might be if
So
they're struggling.
yeah,
It might not be as bad of a smash mouth football game, but yeah, I agree. I agree.
yeah. So that's yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, I that would be awesome if the Apple Cup on November 26th was for a bowl game. That would be incredible.
That would be a lot of fun. All right, so let's wrap up Pac-12. I have 3 picks. Stanford under 4.5 games. We discussed it. There's no way that team is winning 5 games,
Yeah,
at least in my mind. Prepare to eat crow on all of this. And then I think Utah is going to be a very good Pac-12 team who, if they put things together, could be in contention for the college football playoffs. So I have Utah to win the Pac-12 championship game, and I have them team total over 9 at -150 as well. Michael?
yep. I have Oregon's team total over 8.5. Like we talked about, they've got to beat two of BYU, UCLA, Utah, and Oregon State, which they get 3 of those teams not named Oregon State at home. I love the over play it. I may add Stanford to the card. Stanford under with you. I'm going to hold off till the end just to figure out. I'd like to have a nice even 10 team totals to go off of. So,
Yeah, it's not.
um, or having already added Virginia, I'm going to look at whether or not we're gonna go with Iowa or Stanford. But who knows? Maybe there's a team in the SEC where we look at it and we go, you know what? Actually, I want to play this team, so we'll get there. But yeah, I'm very excited for the top of the Pac-12 this year. I think that may be the most entertaining conference championship race across the board.
All right. Well, that wraps up our Pac-12 look at, and we'll move on to the SEC in a second.